Good evening from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 over at neighboring Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, roughly 4 miles away from our location, where SpaceX is readying a Falcon 9 rocket for liftoff this evening. The launch time is currently set for 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 3:41 a.m. UTC. The launch was delayed about an hour and 19 minutes from the first opportunity that SpaceX had tonight at 10:22 p.m. Eastern. That was due to some stormy weather near the Cape Canaveral area. The weather has improved a little bit since that time. However, as you may have just seen, there was a flash of lightning visible. There are thunderstorms lurking just off the coast of Cape Canaveral, about 10 to 20 miles away. So it remains to be seen whether the weather will be acceptable for liftoff of the Falcon 9 at 11:41 p.m., an hour and 9 minutes from now. Still some time for the weather conditions to evolve a little bit and hopefully improve to allow the Falcon 9 to take off tonight. The main threat that the weather team and SpaceX's launch team will be monitoring is the threat of lightning. Lightning could strike the rocket if the rocket lifts off through a thunderstorm or certain types of cloud layers. So there are rules in place that the Eastern Range, the U.S. Space Force's range safety team, puts in place involving cumulus clouds, anvil clouds associated with thunderstorms, as well as thick clouds that may hold an electrical charge. So all those rules are being monitored throughout the evening, alongside other rules such as the winds and other parameters which aren't of great concern, it seems, this evening. The main concern is with the thunderstorms and lightning. This is the final scheduled launch from Florida's Space Coast before NASA takes the stage on Monday with the launch of the Space Launch System moon rocket. That moon rocket is currently standing on Launch Complex 39B, about 5 miles or 8 kilometers north of Pad 40. You just saw another lightning flash there. There is not any lightning in the immediate vicinity of the Cape Canaveral spaceport. However, there are thunderstorms about 10 to 20 miles off the coast, and that lightning is associated with those storms just off the coast of Cape Canaveral tonight. My name is Stephen Clark. I'm editor of SpaceflightNow.com, and I'll be carrying you through the countdown and the flight tonight. If the Falcon 9 rocket is allowed to take off this evening, it's about a 15-minute trip from the launch pad to the point in space where the payload for tonight's mission, 54 Starlink internet satellites, will be deployed over the North Atlantic Ocean in orbit. This will be the 37th orbital launch attempt of the year from Cape Canaveral, extending a record that was broken with the 33rd orbital launch attempt a few weeks ago. The previous record was 32 orbital launch attempts in a calendar year, before 2022. Now there are 36, going on 37 tonight. Now 1 hour and 6 minutes away from tonight's second of 2 instantaneous launch opportunities. As I mentioned before, the first opportunity tonight at 10:22 p.m. was no-go. So SpaceX bypassed that opportunity at 10:22 p.m. and is now targeting the second of 2 opportunities tonight, the backup time of 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time or 3:41 a.m. UTC. At this point in the countdown, SpaceX's launch team is about a half hour, 30 minutes or so away from the time that propellants will begin loading into the Falcon 9 rocket. Before that milestone, SpaceX's launch director and launch conductor will poll the team for a go or no-go to enter into that 35-minute countdown sequence. There's also a check of weather conditions at that time as well to see how things are looking for the launch time. However, even if the weather is no-go, SpaceX could still elect to load propellants into the Falcon 9 and count down to the final minute or so or 2 minutes before launch in hopes that the weather does toggle green in hopes of an improvement in the conditions just in time for liftoff. So we'll see if that's going to be the strategy that SpaceX follows tonight. Now inside of 1 hour until tonight's launch opportunity at 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:41 a.m. UTC, 59 minutes, 30 seconds away. We're not aware of any technical issues that are being worked by SpaceX's launch team this evening. It's just a matter of waiting for the weather conditions, hoping those improve to allow the Falcon 9 to take off tonight. There are 54 Starlink internet satellites stowed on top of the Falcon 9 inside the payload fairing. Those satellites are heading up to join SpaceX's Starlink internet network. SpaceX has launched more than 3,100 Starlink satellites to date. By far, by almost an order of magnitude, this is the largest fleet of satellites in orbit that's ever been placed into orbit around the Earth. And 54 more are on the way to space tonight if the Falcon 9 can get off the ground and the weather cooperates here on the space coast of Florida. Now 58 and a half minutes to go. We just saw another flash of lightning off in the distance here. It's been a stormy evening here at the Kennedy Space Center and the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station area, with a lot of rain throughout the afternoon and the evening hours, some thunder and lightning as well. Those storms have dissipated for the most part. There are thunderstorms, though, just off the coast, and that's likely to be the primary concern heading into this launch opportunity tonight. Now, T-minus 50 minutes remaining until tonight's instantaneous launch opportunity at 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time or 3:41 a.m. UTC. You're looking at a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, where the Falcon 9 is vertical. It was rolled out and raised vertical earlier in the week for a static fire test. That test firing occurred on Thursday morning when the 9 Merlin engines on the bottom of this first stage ignited for about 7 seconds. Hydraulic restraints kept the Falcon 9 firmly on the ground during that test firing. SpaceX no longer performs these static fire tests for most of their launches. However, they do still perform these tests for some launches, such as missions where they've done a lot of work on the first stage booster in between flights. And that's the case for this booster tonight. This booster is tail number B1069, booster 1069. It launched for the first time back on December the 21st of last year on a space station cargo mission to the International Space Station. This booster was damaged during the recovery process, likely due to some rough seas in the Atlantic Ocean as this booster came down on the drone ship. Those seas were rocking the drone ship and appeared to have caused the booster to tilt a bit, and when it came back into Port Canaveral, there was damage to some of the landing leg hardware as well as some crumpled engine nozzles. So those engines have been replaced. The landing legs presumably have also been repaired or replaced, and everything, SpaceX believes everything looks good to launch this booster again for the second time, despite that damage that it sustained in December. Now about 14 minutes remaining until the expected start time of propellant loading. We'll see if that does occur on time to allow this launch attempt at 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time or 3:41 a.m. UTC. Now 43 minutes and 24 seconds remaining until tonight's instantaneous launch opportunity at 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:41 a.m. UTC. While we wait for this launch this evening, we invite you to like this live stream, this stream on our YouTube channel that really helps us expand our reach and expand our audience for coverage of launches like these. You can also join our YouTube channel. We have various membership tiers available to you, and depending on which level you choose, you'll gain access to exclusive video features, and you'll also be supporting our coverage, helping us bring you live coverage like tonight. Now about 7.5 minutes or so remaining until the expected start time of propellant loading. We do expect to hear from SpaceX's launch team in a few minutes on the status of that go, no-go readiness poll. That poll is conducted electronically of the various members of the SpaceX launch team to make sure all stations are go before proceeding into loading propellants. Is this bleeding through on Unity? Now T-minus 39 minutes, 17 seconds. We're less than 5 minutes away from the time that we expect SpaceX to begin loading about 1 million pounds of propellant into the Falcon 9 rocket. It is an exceptionally...
SLD, propellant load, and launch go, no go has pulled green. We are go for propellant loading and launch.
We just heard a call out from SpaceX's launch team that the poll of the team was go. Everything is green. So the launch team will be proceeding into propellant loading at about 3.5 minutes from now is when that process begins. Liftoff remains targeted for 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time, 3:41 a.m. UTC of this Falcon 9 rocket, carrying 54 Starlink internet satellites.
F9 tanks are venting for prop load. This is LD briefing the abort instructions. For urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the primary countdown net. Launch control will abort the auto sequence immediately and proceed into launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off, relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Launch auto sequence is started.
Now T-minus 35 minutes. We heard that call from SpaceX's launch team that the launch auto sequence has started. This is the point at which the countdown transitions controlled to an automated launch sequencer, and is also marking the point at which propellant loading is getting underway out at pad 40. This propellant loading process begins with pumping kerosene and liquid oxygen into the Falcon 9 rocket on the first stage, and in parallel with that, kerosene fuel is being loaded into the second stage. Cryogenic liquid oxygen will be pumped into the second stage beginning at about T-minus 16 minutes. So currently 3 of the 4 propellant tanks on board the vehicle are being loaded. 34 minutes to go until liftoff. T-minus 30 minutes and 25 seconds. We're seeing the first hint of vapors building up around the first stage of the Falcon 9 as cryogenics are loaded into the first stage. This is liquid oxygen that's pumping into this first stage right now. And so we're seeing those vapors from the cold propellants being loaded into the first stage. Now 30 minutes to go until liftoff. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see a file photo from SpaceX from a previous mission showing a stack of Starlink internet satellites, much like the satellites heading to space this evening. This is what these satellites look like when they're flat-packed in launch configuration. In this photo, again from a previous launch, you can see one half of the payload fairing moving around the Starlink satellites for encapsulation in a payload processing facility. Interestingly, you can also note on the payload fairing, on that black inner shell of the fairing, you can see some of the recovery hardware, some tanks and other lines there that help SpaceX recover each half of these payload fairings as they parachute into the ocean for recovery. SpaceX is the only company that does recover and reuse payload fairings and first stage boosters at this time. But yeah, you can see these satellites stacked for launch. This is a stack of roughly 50 satellites. Tonight's launch is carrying 54 Starlink spacecraft into orbit. As I mentioned, there are 54 spacecraft on board this mission. Each satellite weighs a little more than a quarter ton, roughly 250 to 300 kilograms. These satellites are fitted with solar arrays to generate electricity in orbit. Those solar arrays also generate power for the ion propulsion system, a highly efficient thruster system that allows the satellites to raise their own orbit. These satellites will be deployed in an orbit about 150 to 200 miles above the Earth, and then use their onboard propulsion to propel themselves to an operational orbit at 335 miles, or 540 kilometers, at an inclination of 53.2 degrees to the equator. SpaceX builds these satellites at their Starlink facility in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle. One other note for tonight's mission, which is a designated Starlink 4-23. Tonight's mission is carrying 54 Starlink satellites into this 53.2 degree orbit. Most of these launches for this particular orbital shell number 4 of the Starlink network, have carried 53 satellites on this trajectory. Tonight's mission carries 54, and we know SpaceX has been experimenting with some slight improvements to the Falcon 9's lift capacity, some changes to the engine throttle settings and power and performance levels. We haven't heard officially from SpaceX on why tonight's mission is carrying 54 satellites instead of 53, but it does indicate that the performance, barring any change to the satellite configurations themselves, the performance of the Falcon 9 for tonight's mission is improved enough to allow SpaceX to fit one additional quarter-ton satellite on this rocket. Here's what a Starlink user terminal looks like. Starlink consumers can put one of these antennas in an open field on their roof to connect up to the Starlink satellites as they're passing overhead. This is a phased array antenna that has a receiver and a transmitter to allow two-way communications between the Starlink modem, internet modem that users receive, and the satellites as they pass overhead. Once again, here's a full screen shot of Space Launch Complex 40. Those vapors becoming much more apparent now. 26.5 minutes to go until liftoff. These super cold liquid oxygen propellant that is being loaded into the first stage. This liquid oxygen is chilled down to a few hundred degrees below zero. And these vapors come from this super cold liquid oxygen as frost and ice build up on the outer skin of the Falcon 9's first stage. This is a relatively new booster, so it doesn't have a lot of soot or scorch marks, so to speak, on the outer skin of the rocket.
Stage 2 cryo dump has started.
Now, T-minus 24 minutes, we're continuing to see some distant lightning flashes off to the east here from our vantage point at the Kennedy Space Center. But weather conditions here at the Space Center itself and at the Falcon 9 launch pad have improved drastically over the last couple of hours. The weather has improved enough to allow SpaceX to proceed into this phase of the countdown. So the team is optimistic that the weather will continue to be favorable for launch this evening. Again, this is the final scheduled launch from Florida Space Coast until before the launch Monday of NASA's Artemis 1 moon rocket. The Space Launch System is currently on Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center, about 5 miles or 8 kilometers north of Pad 40, which you're watching now. If you're just joining us, you're watching live at Space Launch Complex 40, where SpaceX is going for their 38th launch of the year. Now T-minus 20 minutes and 45 seconds. We expect in the next 30 seconds or so to see the so-called big vent that marks the end of loading of kerosene onto stage 2 and the beginning of chill down, the thermal conditioning of the liquid oxygen transfer lines that lead up to stage 2 in preparation for oxidizer loading on that stage of the Falcon 9. And there's the vent beginning from the strongback.
Stage 2 RP1 load is complete.
We did hear that call out from SpaceX's launch team that the second stage RP1 load is complete. RP1 is rocket propellant 1, that's highly refined kerosene. This is a hydrocarbon that's used on both stages of the Falcon 9 to fuel the Merlin engines. The first stage of the Falcon 9 is powered by 9 Merlin 1D or M1D engines. The second stage has 1 Merlin vacuum engine or MVAC engine that has a large expansion nozzle that's optimized for improved efficiency and performance in the vacuum of space. Now inside of 18 minutes. Again, I'm Stephen Clark, editor of Spaceflight Now, reporting live from the Kennedy Space Center, looking across the spaceport 4 miles distant to Launch Complex 40, where the Falcon 9 rocket is now about halfway through its propellant loading process, which began at T-minus 35 minutes.
Stage 2 LOX load has begun.
T-minus 15 minutes, we've heard confirmation from SpaceX's launch team that the liquid oxygen tank on the second stage is now being loaded. This is the last of the 4 propellant tanks to be loaded this evening. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see an overview of the major events of the countdown. We've already passed a couple of these, which include the beginning of loading propellants at T-minus 35 minutes. The liquid oxygen tank on the second stage is now being loaded. As I mentioned, that began at T-minus 16 minutes. At about T-minus 20 minutes, there was also the call out that the RP1 or kerosene fuel tank on stage 2 was full. Coming up in the final phase of the countdown at T-minus 7 minutes, the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the first stage will begin their chill down procedure. This is a procedure that thermally conditions those engines for ignition. At about T-minus 5.5 minutes, we expect to hear a call out from the team that the RP1 or kerosene fuel load is complete on both stages. On the first stage at that point, the second stage already full. And then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong back on the right side of the Falcon 9 in this view on the right begin its retraction to the proper angle for engine start, about 1.5 degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket. And then at T-minus 2 minutes, the Falcon 9 will be fully loaded with liquid oxygen. At that point, the propellant loading systems will be secured for flight. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9's onboard computer will take control of the countdown, and in that final 60 seconds, we'll see the propellant tanks pressurized. The launch director will verify their go for launch at T-minus 45 seconds, and then the engine controller will command engine start at T-minus 3 seconds, and then following a very quick computer-controlled health check, the Falcon 9 will be cleared for launch at T0. Here are some mission stats for tonight's flight. This is the 172nd flight of a Falcon 9 rocket since June the 4th of 2010. That was the date of the maiden Falcon 9 launch from Pad 40, the same pad that's in use tonight here at the Cape. This is the 180th launch of a Falcon rocket overall, including the Falcon 1, Falcon 9, and Falcon Heavy. It's the second flight of this particular booster, number 1069, the 148th launch of a Falcon 9 from Florida Space Coast, the 95th Falcon 9 launch from Space Launch Complex 40, and interestingly, this is the 150th launch overall from Pad 40, which had its first launch back in 1965 with a Titan rocket. So after our going into tonight, there have been 94 Falcon 9 flights from this pad and 55 Titan rocket launches from Pad 40. The last Titan to fly from this pad was in 2005 before it was handed over to SpaceX. Some more stats here. 114th flight of a reused booster, 57th dedicated Falcon 9 launch for the Starlink network, the 38th SpaceX launch of the year, and the 37th orbital class space launch attempt from the Cape or the Kennedy Space Center so far in 2022. And I mentioned this booster, number 1069, has flown once before. This was its launch back on December the 21st, 2021. And it made a landing on the drone ship, one of SpaceX's recovery vessels, about 8 or 9 minutes or so after this launch. But due to some rough seas, it was damaged during the recovery. And SpaceX has spent the last number of months repairing the rocket, replacing some engines and other components that were damaged to get it ready for tonight's launch. Now, inside of 11 minutes, if you're just joining us, you're watching a live view of Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral, where SpaceX is getting ready to fly a Falcon 9 rocket tonight to orbit with 54 Starlink internet satellites on board. I want to give a shout out to She Speaks. Thank you for that contribution in the Super Chat. If you want to support our coverage, we really appreciate any support you can provide through the Super Chat function here on YouTube. You can also become a member of our YouTube channel. We have various tiers of membership available that you can choose from. And if you do that, depending on which level you join at, you can gain access to exclusive video features, and you can do your part in helping support our coverage. We really enjoy bringing you these live launch streams here from Cape Canaveral, and we enjoy covering the space program and space industry around the world, but your support helps make that possible. Now inside of 10 minutes until liftoff.
Engine chill has started.
Now inside of 7 minutes, we're hearing the call that engine chill down is underway. This is the process that thermally conditions the 9 Merlin 1D or M1D engines down at the bottom of the first stage. This is done by flowing small amounts of cryogenic liquid oxygen through some of the plumbing that leads into that engine compartment, through those lines leading into the engines themselves, to make sure that the components and hardware are not adversely affected by the shock of this cryogenic propellant as it rushes into the engine at high speed, high volume rate, high flow rate at engine startup. Now 6 minutes, 10 seconds to go.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
And there's the call. Stage 1 kerosene load is complete. So at this point, about 46,000 gallons of kerosene fuel has been loaded into the Falcon 9 rocket out at pad 40. Liquid oxygen continues to flow into the launch vehicle. That will be secured and completed about T-minus 2 minutes.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
Now, inside of 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 35 seconds to go. Continuing to see some lightning flashes offshore, but we've heard no indication that the weather here locally will prevent liftoff this evening.
Retract has started.
The strong back is now being retracted on the right side of the rocket, back to its ignition position, about 1.5 degrees from the vertical Falcon 9. On the left-hand side of your screen, you can see the red trace that shows the expected ground track tonight. This is a standard Starlink launch to the northeast from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We've labeled Space Launch Complex 40 and the drone ship a shortfall of Gravitas. Those locations marked here. The drone ship parked roughly due east of Charleston, South Carolina. The rocket will head out parallel to the east coast of the U.S. and then over the North Atlantic east of the Canadian Maritime provinces, and will deploy the 54 Starlink internet satellites about 15 minutes after liftoff. Now T-minus 3 minutes, we've heard the call that the first stage liquid oxygen tank is now fully loaded. So the last tank being filled right now is the second stage liquid oxygen tank. And there you hear that call out, stage 2 LOX load complete. The second stage is fully loaded with liquid oxygen, so the Falcon 9 is now full of propellant, 1 million pounds of propellant on board this vehicle. Now inside of 90 seconds until liftoff. At T-minus 60 seconds, the Falcon 9 will take control of the countdown with its onboard computer. And there's T-minus 60 seconds. Falcon 9 is in startup. We just heard the call out. This is the transition to onboard control. Now inside 30 seconds until launch. T-minus 10 seconds. T-minus 5. There's engine start, ignition, and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket carrying 54 more Starlink internet satellites into orbit from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And the Falcon 9 has cleared the towers. You can see the Falcon 9 heading to space, climbing through some cloud cover here over the Cape Canaveral area. Those 9 Merlin engines giving a big rumble to spectators here at the Kennedy Space Center. T-plus 70 seconds, Falcon 9 now supersonic. And we're now switching to SpaceX's stream. This coming from a long-range tracker. T-plus 90 seconds. And now an onboard view from the Falcon 9 showing those 9 Merlin engines doing their job. About 45 seconds remaining in this first stage burn. Everything looking good so far. Coming up on main engine cutoff, that'll be followed by stage separation. And we see stage separation following a good MECO, good main engine cutoff, and their second stage ignition, the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage now firing. And we've seen payload fairing jettison now, exposing those 54 Starlink satellites to the environment of space for the first time. The second stage now in space, passing 100 kilometers altitude. Now past the 4-minute point in tonight's mission. Now approaching the 2-minute point in the second stage burn. 4 minutes, 22 seconds since liftoff. The second stage is being powered by that Merlin vacuum engine, that nozzle on the Merlin vacuum engine glowing red hot. The MVAC engine produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust in a vacuum to power this stack of 54 Starlink satellites to space, or into orbit. It's already in space at this point at an altitude of 170 kilometers. Now T plus 5 minutes, 40 seconds, the altitude of the second stage, as you can see on the lower right in this feed from SpaceX, has just passed 200 miles. It's about 200 kilometers. It's about 120 miles in altitude. The telemetry from the first stage has shown that the booster has reached its apogee, the highest point of its trajectory, and is now dropping below 100 kilometers, or about 60 miles. This map from SpaceX shows the relative positions of Stage 1 making its descent, and Stage 2 continuing its climb to orbit. That blue line is what's called the instantaneous impact point, or impact line. That's if the second stage cut off its engine now. That's the trajectory the second stage would follow during an uncontrolled reentry back into the atmosphere. That's not the plan. Still about 2 minutes of that second stage burn still to go. The first stage has lit its engines, 3 of its 9 engines, for an entry burn to slow down for its fall back into the atmosphere. You can see the velocity on the lower left decreasing during that entry burn. And we've heard verbal confirmation now that the entry burn is complete. The next firing of the booster engines will be a single engine burn for the landing. That'll begin about 30 seconds before the landing on the drone ship to do that final braking maneuver for touchdown.
Stage 1 transonic.
Terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn.
We've heard verbal confirmation now that the Stage 1 landing burn is underway. We're hearing these audio callouts as usual a little bit before we see visual confirmation, but we're now seeing that visual confirmation on the left side of your screen, showing an aft-facing view from an onboard camera on the booster. We expect to see the drone ship. There's the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. And there's touchdown. Landing, booster number 1069 back on the deck of the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas, completing its second flight to space. An apparently good landing of the first stage booster of the Falcon 9. Its first landing on the drone ship on its first mission back in December was not as smooth. During the recovery process, there were rough seas that caused some damage on the booster. That booster has been repaired and has now completed its second launch to space. During that landing process, we heard a call out that the second stage has completed its orbit insertion burn with its Merlin vacuum engine. So that MVAC engine is shut down to place the 54 Starlink satellites into the expected orbit, a nominal orbit insertion we heard from SpaceX's launch team. So now about a 5.5 minute wait at this point before we can confirm full mission success. We're still waiting on the deployment of the 54 Starlink satellites. That is expected at T plus 15 minutes and 21 seconds.
Expected loss of signal, Bermuda.
T plus 14 minutes and 20 seconds. We're about a minute away from the expected time that we should hear deployment of the Starlink internet satellites. The satellites are stacked on the front end of the second stage of the Falcon 9. We're not going to be seeing any live video of the deployment. SpaceX has ended their live webcast of tonight's mission, but we should hear verbal confirmation from the launch team that the deployment has been completed successfully. And we're seeing this map provided by SpaceX showing the location of the Stage 2 and Starlink stack over the North Atlantic Ocean.
Starlink deploy confirmed.
SpaceX has just confirmed the deployment of the 54 Starlink satellites, so this completes the launch phase of the mission. Another successful flight in the books for the Falcon 9 family. This was the 171st launch of a Falcon 9 rocket to date since the very first Falcon 9 launch on June the 4th of 2010 from Pad 40, which you're now seeing live once more. An empty launch pad, the strong back in its retract launch position where it retracted back during the liftoff of the Falcon 9. And over the next few days, SpaceX will return that strong back, which also doubles as a transporter arm for the Falcon 9, back to the hangar for integration with the Falcon 9 for the next mission, which is actually scheduled for launch no earlier than next Sunday night, September the 4th from Pad 40. So that's an 8-day turnaround planned at this launch pad before the next Starlink mission takes flight from Florida. Here's a view of the upcoming launches that we're tracking. The next launch is the Space Launch System test flight. This is the maiden flight of NASA's SLS moon rocket from Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Here's a live view of the Artemis 1 moon rocket on the launch pad at Kennedy. Liftoff is scheduled no earlier than Monday. Everything's on track right now for a launch attempt Monday. There's a 2-hour window available, opening at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time or 12:33 UTC. We're streaming continuous live views of Pad 39B on our YouTube channel, so you can be sure to tune into that, and we'll have a full up coverage and broadcast of the Artemis 1 countdown beginning Sunday night before the start of propellant loading on the Space Launch System, which begins shortly after midnight Monday morning. That's a critical milestone to begin fueling the massive Space Launch System moon rocket with more than 750,000 gallons of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. If that countdown goes according to plan, liftoff again is targeted for Monday at 8:33 a.m. Eastern Time, 12:33 UTC, to send NASA's Orion crew capsule on an unpiloted mission, an uncrewed mission around the moon. Following that mission, there are 3 more SpaceX launches scheduled over the next couple of weeks. Over the next 2 weeks, there are 3 more Falcon 9 flights on the books, beginning with the launch on Wednesday Eastern Time, Tuesday night Pacific Time, of a Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 4 East at Vandenberg Space Force Base. This will be carrying another batch of Starlink satellites into orbit, this mission targeting a polar orbit in the Starlink network. And then on September 4th, next Sunday, from Pad 40, another batch of Starlink Internet satellites is set for liftoff on a Falcon 9 rocket. This mission will have a rideshare payload. We'll have a Sherpa orbital space tug produced by the company Spaceflight, and that space tug will carry a technology demonstration payload for Boeing for a potential future broadband communications constellation. So that mission is scheduled for September the 4th, and then on September the 10th, no earlier than September the 10th, another Falcon 9 rocket is set for launch with another set of Starlink satellites from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. And on that mission, there's a rideshare payload as well. The roughly 1.5-ton Blue Walker 3 satellite is riding to orbit with that Starlink mission. Blue Walker 3 is a demonstration or prototype satellite for a company called AST Space Mobile, which aims to provide cell phone connectivity from orbit, similar to the concept just announced a few days ago by SpaceX and T-Mobile to connect cell phones to the Starlink network in orbit. So those are the next few missions that we'll be monitoring here from the United States, and the next few missions that we have confirmed launch dates for at this point. Before we sign off, we want to give a thank you for those of you who contributed in the Super Chat function. Greg Williams, thank you for your contribution. Also, if you haven't liked our stream, please like our stream before you sign off tonight. And we also ask that you consider joining our YouTube channel. We have multiple membership tiers available for you to choose from, and your contributions there help us support our coverage. So until next time, until tomorrow, we thank you for joining us tonight for the launch of the Starlink 4-23 mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. We'll be back tomorrow night with live coverage of the start of the Artemis 1 countdown here at the Kennedy Space Center. We'll leave you with one last look at Space Launch Complex 40, where the Falcon 9 took off tonight at 11:41 p.m. Eastern Time, carrying 54 Starlink satellites to orbit. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.